Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this, our very first virtual Senior Fellow Society meeting. My name is Irving Taylor, and it's my privilege to chair the Senior Fellow Society. I'm, of course, so sorry not to be able to welcome you in reality to our November meeting, which was, in fact, to be held in the Barber Surgeons Hall. However, I'm sure you agree, we have a very worthy substitute. We will shortly be addressed by our president, Neil Mortensen, and I will formally introduce him in a few minutes. There are far more people actually attending this webinar than we expect at our normal meetings. And so for those of you who are not familiar with the format of Senior Fellow Society meetings, and perhaps have never even heard of the Senior Fellow Society before today, perhaps I could give a brief summary of our activities. We normally meet twice a year in June and November. The June meeting is our regional meeting, and the November meeting is held in London. The meetings consist of talks by distinguished speakers on a whole range of general topics, by no means all medical, and designed to be of interest and of educational value to both surgeons and to partners, who I should say are always welcome to attend. We always include in our meeting visits to places of interest. For example, last November we visited Apsley House in Piccadilly. This was the home of the Duke of Wellington, and we also had a private visit not only around the home, but the house, but also Wellington Arch, and it was really quite fascinating. Of course, was followed up by excellent speakers and a very good dinner at the Royal Air Force Club. Thanks to David Jones, who is the member. It's always nice to think about what we try to achieve in these meetings. I guess the best way of describing it would probably be as a sort of surgical traveling club. It gives people the opportunity to meet up socially with their friends, ex-colleagues, and in a very convivial atmosphere, in very nice surroundings, and hopefully an enjoyable experience for everybody concerned. And for those of you who've never been before and now hearing about it for the first time, perhaps you will give it a try. We hope we'll be functioning in reality at the next meeting in June. We are in fact a constituent society of the college, and as such we are required to hold an annual general meeting at the November meeting, and I will now start that, but don't worry, this is going to be very short. We'll just put the agenda on the screen. I should mention also that we're very fortunate in having excellent administrative support to the Society. Jane Roberts, who's head of events, Eduardo Miranda, and of course Judith Mitchell. Many of you will know Judith. She's been a long-standing stalwart of the college. Yes, and here we have the agenda, which I hope you can all see the agenda for the meeting. I've already given a welcome. I don't think we've got any apologies. If we look at the next slide, we'll see the minutes of the last meeting. For those that can read it, I hope those that were present will agree that it's a reasonable account of what took place. As I mentioned, we met in the Royal Air Force Club. We had some excellent speakers, an excellent dinner, and perhaps for those that were present will give me a virtual nod and say this is a reasonable account of what took place. Can we go on to the next slide, which are the matters arising from the minutes? I'm not sure whether that gone up yet. Actually, I've got a copy of it here, so perhaps I'll just talk to the matters arising. First of all, of course, we were able to have our regional meeting in Bristol, which was planned for the 16th and 17th of June this year. That was cancelled for obvious reasons, as indeed was the college presidential triennial trip, which was to Berlin and Lake Constance in May. I don't think there was anything else to mention on the minutes arising. I think that's probably everything. Can I have the next slide, please? Oh, well, never mind. Okay. Can I just say, for the next item of the agenda, basically is to let people know about our regional meeting, which takes place in Bristol. John Newman was arranging the regional meeting in Bristol. Here we go. John Newman was kindly arranging the Bristol meeting to take place in June of this year. Obviously, that was cancelled, but he's kindly agreed to reschedule the meeting for the 14th and 16th of June 2021. I know he's put together an incredibly good programme. The visits I know will be to SS Great Britain and to the Concord Museum. We're booked to stay in a fantastic hotel, the Avon Gorge Hotel. Some of you may know it. It's just overlooking the Clifton Suspension Bridge. And I know John had arranged some superb speakers, and that should be an excellent meeting. And so please put the date in your diary, and let us hope, all being well, by June 2021, we'll be functioning in a normal way. Richard Pusey very kindly agreed to host the 2022 meeting, and that will be held in Chelmsford, so you might even put that in your diary. As far as the November meeting for next year, we are planning to meet in the transformed Royal College of Surgeons. We'll have a guided tour around the college, and again, that promises to be a most interesting meeting. The other matter just to bring to your attention is that Terence Hope has kindly volunteered and has been appointed as committee meeting to a member of the committee. I don't think there's anything else I need to mention. There is any other business. Perhaps I should mention that if anybody has any questions, not only for any other business, but subsequent questions to both Neil and to Jackie Webber, please feel free to add your questions on the chat line. Jane will amalgamate those and we'll read them out. I'm assuming that there is no other business. Can I just mention just a couple of things and then the other business? The first thing to mention, I'm really wearing my other hat as honorary editor of Lives of Fellows of Royal College of Surgeons. I usually remind fellows at our meeting about the importance of lives. As you know, we are very anxious to ensure that every single fellow of the Royal College who sadly passes away has a obituary written. This goes online in the Lives. At the moment, we're approaching 10,000 obituaries of fellows. It's an extremely important document, and it's so important that we find out about every one of our fellows that does pass away. So if you hear of a colleague or friend, please make sure that the college are informed. We're also anxious, of course, to obtain obituaries, and although we can write sort of factual obituaries about individuals, it's far, far better for the obituary to be written by a friend or ex-colleague or somebody who has personal knowledge of the individual. These obituaries mean so much in that regard. So please feel free to offer to write an obituary. I should also mention that we've now got the opportunity of including photographs with the obituary. And this is another very, very important improvement in the whole situation. I should also mention that we're now obtaining something like 2,000 hits per month from Lives. And I do believe that Lives actually provides really a vital resource and a unique history of the evolution of surgery in this country and social history. So please do feel free to contribute to writing obituaries. Also, just to remind you that we do actually take self-obituaries. The advantage of that, of course, is that you can include the photograph that you want. Okay, well, in the absence of any other business, I think that concludes the matters of the annual general meeting. And so we come really to the main business of the afternoon, which is to have a presidential address from Neil Mortensen. Now, Neil took over as president of the college in July of this year. which I'm sure you'll agree is an extraordinary time to take on this onerous role. But I must say, he has acquitted himself admirably in his first few months in the post, and clearly and eloquently responded to the challenges and effectively, I believe, represented the surgical position in these unprecedented times. You will know that in his day job, he is recognised as undoubtedly one of the most distinguished colorectal surgeons, both nationally and indeed internationally. He holds the post of Professor of Colorectal Surgery in Oxford, having previously worked in both Bristol and Birmingham. So we look forward to hearing from you, Neil. We'll hear about his first 100 days, I gather, bring us up to date with college activity. Now, following Neil's talk, we're going to have a brief presentation from Jackie Weller, who, as you know, is the Deputy Chief Executive, and she's going to bring us up to date with the situation regarding the new college build, although I think it's now known as the college transformation, which I think is a better term. There will, of course, be time for questions, and so during the talk, perhaps you could put your questions on the chat line. Jane will then amalgamate them, put them in some sort of order, and present them to Neil. So, Neil, it's over to you. We look forward to your talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Irvin, and thank you for your kind words. Tumultuous times indeed. Welcome to my home office. This is my little, if you like, shrine to the Royal College of Surgeons. You can see in the little pictogram in Oxfordshire. Over my right shoulder is a Crookshank print of the examination of the young surgeon, and below it an 1800 print of what the college looked like back then. In fact, if you look at the slide, not a lot different. I call it the first 100 days because that's kind of traditional. F.D. Roosevelt coined the term in 1933, and it's been a kind of talisman for how well a president does. And I'm going to expect you all to ask me some really tough questions about my first 100 days. Of course, they have been incredibly different from what I expected. You remember that I spoke to you last year when we were at the RAF Club, and it just is completely amazing how suddenly, overnight, everything can change. So the college in the time of COVID. Next slide, please. So I imagined that I would have a proper, if you like, induction or inauguration with the gown and the medal and all that. I would preside over diplomates' days and dinners, and I would sail into the college and sit in the president's office. I can tell you, I've actually only sat in the president's office properly once to sign some certificates. I have been in the college 2 or 3 times. I've been looking around the new building, and Jackie's going to tell you all about that later. Next slide, please. The world suddenly turned upside down. As many of you will know, back in April, surgery was, at least elective surgery, was stopped dead in its tracks, and we entered this virtual world of speaking to each other by Zoom or Teams. And in fact, there's been some good things about it. In the top left, you can see there meeting lots of regional directors. We've been able to meet lots of colleagues, lots of one-to-ones. Bottom right there, you can see that's the inside of Matt Hancock's, I think, drawing room or kitchen. I'm not quite sure what. And then, of course, you can speak to your home on the media too, speak from your home to the media too. It's interesting, during the real height of the pandemic, a lot of surgeons said to us, you know, it's actually been pretty good. We've had a shared sense of purpose. There's been a reduced, if you like, burden of bureaucracy. There's been a rapid adoption of new ways of thinking. One example, just to give you a clue, is the whole use now of remote and video clinics. Most patients are first of all triaged by phone call or by video, and only the ones who really need to come along are seen in the clinic. Obviously, that can have some problems. It's not perfect, but it has made a major change to the way we work. And of course, it's easier for patients. They don't have to park in terrible congested hospital car parks, etc., etc. Some good things about it. Next slide, please. I'm not going to just talk about COVID on its own, but we will talk about some of its effects. Jackie's going to talk about the building. We're going to talk about the second wave. And I'm also going to mention our independent review on diversity and inclusion. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we are. We got through the first, and here is the second wave. And of course, this time is a bit more difficult because hospitals have already cranked up activity and the beds aren't empty. So simultaneously, they're having to deal with the press of medical emergencies coming in and try and keep elective surgery going. So how did they do? Or how are we doing? Next slide, please. Well, not very well in terms of elective surgery. You can see here from the figures in August, there is a massive, massive queue of people waiting. Now 2 million patients waiting longer than 18 weeks, and about 100 or over 100,000 now waiting more than 52 weeks. You can see there 111,000, and in Wales, compared with their population, massive numbers in Northern Ireland too. So it's a huge, huge mountain or backlog of wait list patients. Next, please. So back in September, we ran a survey asking how everybody was doing in terms of trying to get back to normal, what we call restoring surgery. 970 responses. There are problems with sample size and bias and so on, but taking all that into account, what did they say? Here we are. Next slide, please. So 93% of surgeons, that's good, were able to undertake planned procedures in the preceding 4 weeks. There were some specialties which were specially, if you like, compromised. ENT surgery, for example, because of aerosol generating procedures, and plastic surgery had a difficult time. 48% of surgeons said that extra theatre capacity was the thing that would help them most see more patients. But of course, everything was slowed down by infection control protocols around COVID, even if by September, most people were just back in their ordinary gear in theatre. Next, please. And of course, lack of theatre staff is a barrier too. If the staff are off with COVID or their partners are, if you like, quarantining for a couple of weeks, or their kids are off school, everything is very fragile and it's easy for a theatre team to fall apart. Next slide, please. The Nhs England figures were that 80% of elective activity had returned, but we didn't really quite agree with that, and there were some figures published by the NHS suggesting that it was lower than that. It was probably around 65%, a pretty good effort, but certainly not anything like near return to normal activity. Next, please. What were the problems? Well, 22% of surgeons said they weren't able to access a COVID light site, and this is one of the things we've been particularly calling for, to make sure that you have a safe environment in which to operate on patients. Next, please. At that time, and we'll say a bit more about that later, 40% of surgeons could access staff tests and within 24 hours, but in 27% of surgeons or occasions, this took longer than 48 hours. And only 59% said that 59% said that asymptomatic staff were not being tested, which meant that 40% only were being regularly tested. And again, we'll come to that in a minute. Next, please. The independent sector was blocked book by the NHS across the period of the pandemic, and that kept going till or will be kept going to a degree until December, and new contracts are being arranged, which meant that much NHS activity could happen in the independent sector. A lot of that happened in London, and of course, where there was independent sector availability, that was great. For example, here in Oxford, breast cancer surgery was all done in the private hospital and kept going brilliantly. Next, please. Surgical training, however, fell off a cliff. And then you can see there the main reason was lack of elective activity was the main barrier. We'll mention a bit more of that later. Next slide, please. So there has been some good news. Mostly, cancer surgery has largely kept pace with demand, though of course there is much talk about the reservoir of undiagnosed patients still to come. Cardiac and emergency surgery, for example, continued undiminished, and does so even in places like Liverpool and Leeds in the northeast. We're really pleased to announce or to agree or to, if you like, say that we had repeatedly asked for regular staff testing to make the staff test feel safe and the patients feel safe. And at last, NHS England is rolling that out just this week and next week. So there will be regular testing for all staff, which is absolutely brilliant. So we've learned more about infection prevention and control, the whole business of aerosol generating procedures, what actually does cause trouble and what doesn't. And as I say, people have become much more relaxed as the prevalence of the virus went down and were wearing their ordinary theatre garb over the last couple of months. Next, please. So all the way through, we were calling for these ring-fenced facilities, which would be as far as possible COVID-free, everybody tested, including the patients. There should be a guaranteed access to speedy tests for the surgical teams. This is now happening. Hurrah. We asked for the independent sector to be used, and that happened. That was brilliant. We are asking, especially this time, that when staff are repurposed, for example, to go and help in intensive care and so on, as the need goes up with patients being admitted with COVID, that there would be a fair allocation. They wouldn't be, if you like, scavenged from theatre to provide the staff in the ITU, so we could carry or can carry on with surgery through the winter. And most importantly, we are banging the drum to support surgical trainees. Next slide, please. So when are we going to catch up? Next slide, please. I don't think it's going to be, next slide, please, this winter. As you've heard on all the news media, the tension between emergency and elective services is much too tight, and we'll be lucky if we keep going at around 80% capacity. And that obviously doesn't make any difference to the residual backlog. Next, please. It won't be spring either, because the recovery is going to be very slow. The mountain by then will be bigger, and the various agencies, including National Health Service England and the Department of Health and Social Care, are grappling with what should be a national plan for elective surgery next. And we've been calling for some very firm plans and arrangements. Next, please. Some have said that the surgery is the solution to this backlog of surgery is that you have some surgical hubs and beds which are completely away from the emergency provision, as COVID-free as possible, and that these would be rather like, and if I can use the term not pejoratively, rather like surgical factories where throughput is high, standards are excellent, and if you like, there can be some hope of making a dent in the massive backlog. This would all obviously have to go hand in hand with better care of the staff and a premium on job satisfaction. But those kinds of arrangements are being considered as we speak. Next slide, please. Now, before the George Floyd affair and before Black Lives Matter, in my pitch to be voted or elected president of the Royal College of Surgeons, one of the themes was getting a better deal for women and racial diversity. And I am really, really pleased that Baroness Helena Kennedy, herself married to a surgeon, agreed to chair this independent review of diversity and inclusion in surgical leadership. Like it or not, the fact that I and the 3 vice presidents at the moment are all older white males doesn't chime well with all the young people coming into surgery and the younger group of surgeons in consultant appointments around the country. We have to make it easy for everybody to be properly represented at the highest level in surgery nationally. I won't read out all the objectives, that they're on the screen, and I'll just tell you a little bit more about how the review is going. Next, please. So this is the panel, and you'll recognize some of the names there: Bernie Ribeiro and Avril Mansfield, for example. And next, please. The approach is to gather evidence. So the panel sits and they're presented with evidence around these subjects: diversity, careers in surgery, surgery and race, surgery and gender, surgery and LGBT, surgery and bullying and harassment, and then the various college initiatives. You'll know about women in surgery and our SL Wolfson leadership program, for example. And the idea is that all the evidence will have been gathered by December, and we hope that the review will be published, warts and all, sometime towards the end of March. At the moment, they are still gathering information. Next slide, please. There has been a questionnaire. If you felt you wanted to personally submit something, you can see there that the panel has input from the panel members, from the survey, from focus groups, from seminar attendance, and there's a possibility for email submission. You can see there the email address, diversity@rcseng.ac.uk. So please do write in if you would like to make a contribution, and there's stuff on the website too. Next, please. So let's talk about surgical training. Just today, the Joint Committee on Surgical Training's report was published, and it doesn't make very happy reading. Logbook numbers were down in more than 50% of all surgical specialties, and they haven't now recovered to 2019 levels from the peak of the pandemic. It's interesting that some specialties have been specially disadvantaged. For example, trauma was much reduced during the total lockdown because people weren't driving so much. And of course, elective orthopedics, and we have a prioritization scheme. So many people needing a hip or a knee might be in priority 4 of priorities 1 to 4. And so if elective surgery isn't starting and there's a massive backlog, those are the patients that are going to be badly disadvantaged. So there are problems for certain trainees, but all trainees are finding it really tough, and we have to fight the corner for them. As they're saying, as we're saying, if surgery stops, so too does training, and then so too do the surgeons of the future. We did manage to have an agreement made with Nhs England and the independent sector to allow trainees access to training opportunities in the independent sector. I think that's the first that's ever actually happened, which is absolutely brilliant. There are ongoing discussions about lengthening training, about perhaps more fellowships, about mentoring in the early years of a new consultant post. Lots and lots and lots of things up in the air. Lots of talk about making every single operation a training opportunity. Clearly, it's a massive problem, and it's got to be something that the college focuses on really, really carefully. Next slide, please. Surgical exams have been a headache too. Much has moved online. There were big discussions about what should happen to the person-to-person exams, which you'll all remember. Even though they had gone to an OSCE style station sort of examination, it was agreed that there should not be any patients because, of course, the COVID problems made it very difficult to quarantine both the examinees, the examiners and the patients. But having said all that, some exams have gone ahead. First of all, the MRCS Part 1 remote has happened. There have been some problems with the software, with people's computers crashing and so on and so on. There has been a bit of pushback over the fact that although a bigger proportion of those examined passed this year, 42%, there was a pass mark around the 77% level arranged by classic educational examination techniques. There's some ongoing discussion and explanations to the candidates, and anybody who fails in this diet is allowed to do it again without effect on their overall number of chances. The FRCS has gone ahead successfully, and the Part 2s are happening as we speak. It's been extremely difficult. There have been lots of concerns, a reduced number of stations, for example, no live patients, but general surgery, trauma and orthopedics, vascular surgery, and I think a couple of other specialties have all completed successfully without any major hiccup. Tribute to John McGregor and his team. It's been a massive, massive, massive problem, as you can imagine. But of course, the alternative, which would have been not having any exams at all, would have had two huge effects. One is it would clearly have meant that our trainees in their latter years of training wouldn't have been able to have had the examination, and obviously then there would be no progression and no opportunities for people to take up new consultant posts. We're all beginning to big sigh of relief. It's not quite over yet, but fingers crossed that the rest of the examination diet continues without any major hindrance. Next slide, please. Just to say, we have, as usual, given out about 2.5 million in research projects, as in for fellowships. The Royal College of Surgeons Fellowships is an incredibly successful program. During the height of the pandemic, we started a research hub, and there are over 250 projects. We're looking over and helping people to network together to create the projects across all specialties. And COVID research is the subject of our winter appeal. Next slide, please. So those are our priorities. I won't read them all out. Obviously, we need to be seen to be helping everybody, which we can do remotely, just appearing on the media and so forth. We have the review I've told you about. We have further work on the future of surgery, and obviously the launch of the development of our new headquarters. And as I've said, most of all, trying to get a good deal for our trainees. Now, Jackie's going to say a bit more about the building in just a second, but my last slide, please. You have to keep a sense of humor in all this. And I talked in a couple of meetings the other day about resilience, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulty, shock or injury, toughness. It's certainly teaching us all of that, both personally and in the college. And I have to say the college staff, despite most of them working from home in difficult circumstances, have been absolutely brilliant. If you haven't read it, I rather like John Mortimer, the author of Rumpole of the Baileys, first part of his autobiography, Clinging to the Wreckage. We're not quite clinging to the wreckage, but you have to keep a sense of humor. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you very much, Neil. I think you've given us a very honest insight into the problem that the college is facing and society as a whole is facing in terms of the backlog of individuals requiring surgery. And the thing that I think must worry many of us is the whole question of how training is going to continue. We're going to take questions after we've heard from Jackie Webber, known to everybody, I think, here. Jackie has been involved with the college for many, many, many years. I hope you don't mind me saying that, Jackie. She's now the Deputy Chief Executive, and she's going to give us an insight or to show us how the new college has been transformed. Jackie, thank you.
Thank you very much, Irving. It's nice to see you. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to show you a little bit about what the building actually looks like now. I've visited the building since lockdown every month. The building has carried on. As you know, construction has been allowed to carry on, subject to government guidelines. It was a bit of a shock, as you can imagine. But we definitely managed to keep going, and we are slightly delayed with the practical completion, but I can show you my latest tour, and this was taken a couple of weeks ago. So there are some computer generated images in my presentation, because I need those to keep inspiring me, but there are some real life images as well, and this is mostly photographs apart from this slide. So we're looking at what's happening in January is that all the scaffolding will be down. It will still be under the ownership of Waits, our construction partner, and they will be in January starting the landscaping. In March, on the 15th of March, we will receive practical completion. So we'll really, in essence, be getting the keys, and we will be able to start moving in from March. April, May will be a really, really busy time because, as you know, we have only got permission to be in the Nuffield building until the end of June. So from the 15th of March to the end of June, we are moving all our treasures, all our records from Nuffield into the Barry building, and our specialist associations, which I'll talk about a little bit more. So everything, that will be a very intense time, and we have great plans for that time. So we have just recently agreed a practical completion date of the 15th of March. It was at the end of November, and that has been the delay from COVID. And as some of you will know, that the force majeure clause in our contract means that we have to give the builders time, but we don't necessarily pay them for that. So we're in very sensitive negotiations at the moment that I can't really say very much more, but for this purpose, we are heading to our new building on the 15th of March. The museum, for those of you who are involved in the design and planning of the museum, that we are aiming for that to be open on Hunter's birthday in February 2023, and we are on schedule with that. My next few slides I will whiz through, so whoever's doing my slides, if we can just take people through the slides. So this is back a bit, sorry. This is Portugal Street, and for those of you who visited the building and have been brave enough to go around the rear of the building, won't recognise this in certain times. This is the new rear of the building, and this is, if you remember, we've retained the front part of the building, and that's the entrance, the library that we've all refurbished, but the rear of the building is a new build, and we've been able to mirror some of the beautiful stone from the front of the building on the back, and those slants that you can see there have actually the same pattern as our pillars at the front. We have Nuffield squeezed in on the right that you can see, and that was how it was right across the building. So we've got slightly higher, but we've got this amazing presence in Portugal Street, which is the rear, and there will be an entrance into the building from Portugal Street. Next slide. This is looking from the building out into Portugal Street, and even I, who've been, as Irving said, really engaged with this project, I was amazed at the light coming into the building from the rear. So that's why I took that photograph, and that will be a lift into the building for people that need access. There'll be a ramp at the front, And this will be quite a vibrant entrance, because we'll have a lot of the Portugal LSE students and Huntera visitors coming in that way. And that will be eventually a public realm. So Portugal Street will be a lot busier than it has been. This is a computer generated image, I hasten to add, of the entrance. And it probably doesn't look very different to how we all remember the entrance, but it will be more accessible, and we will still display some of our treasures there. And it'll be, as it was when it was built, a bit of a landing place to come into the building. And I think when you walk into the building, that sense of arrival is really important, and that retained part has been beautifully restored. I hasten to add, with lots of AV and IT and security, but you won't see that. But that's the entrance as we all remember it. This is a computer generated image of the reception desk and the ground floor and the entrance to the Huntera Museum. So the Huntera Museum will be on the ground floor. This, the next picture is a real life picture, and this is Judith Mitchell's old office. So I wanted to show you that because I expect a lot of you remember that room. Judith sort of sat where the tarpaulin is. But what I wanted to show people that see these set of slides is how we're discovering still parts of the building. That it's a big crack down the middle there. That's where we kept a lot of our records, but I'm having to go on site and really make quite big decisions around what we do with that. And obviously I've got advisors, but it's about protecting that part of the building for the next few decades. That will be a temporary exhibition for our visitors and associated with the museum. Next slide, please. There will be a cafe on the ground floor. The top picture there is how it looks at the moment, and the bottom picture is how it's going to be. It won't be as orange, I promise. I think we have more of a sort of collegiate colour coming in. But so going to overlook the Portugal Street, and it will be open for everybody to come in, have a well-deserved cup of coffee. And I think what we'll have on some of the slides there is about surgery, and a lot of patients will come to the museum. So I want them to learn about our college and what surgeons do for patients, so that they remember that it's the Royal College of Surgeons of England if they've visited the museum or just generally sort of passing the building. So that will be the cafe. The next picture is the Fellows and Members Room. And for those of you, this was the old college secretary's office on the ground floor next to Judith's office. And we've opened that up. And that will be a beautifully relaxing room that people such as yourselves will be welcome to come in and just take time with your colleagues, and some of the more junior surgeons can come in and meet people, but it will be a really sort of quite nice social area, and that will be open a lot of hours during the day. So from your memory of perhaps what you've seen in the bulletin, the back of the building is brand new, and it has an atrium, and the design of the atrium ceiling is taken from the 1940s and before museum ceiling. So it won't have that horrid blue tarpaulin because that's protecting it just at the moment. But when you walk through the retained part, as you used to, into the new area, there will be this immense light coming into the new building, as you will have seen in a lot of new buildings. There's various numbers of staircases, as you can imagine. This is the main staircase taking you through the building from floor to floor. But the atrium ceiling is really splendid. Next slide, please. At the back of the retained building, we never really saw this when you came into the college, but at the back of the library was this wall. And when the designers looked at our building and its potential, they wanted this wall to display a lot of the treasures of the college. And for when you're standing in the new building, to look back at the past, and this wall where there will be a number of busts displayed and a number of portraits. And that will be, I think, a real showcase for the new building, and it will be about looking at the past and just respecting the past of the profession. And I think it will be a very powerful image and representation of the college and the profession. It will look better when it's finished. It's a real sort of higgledy-piggledy wall, and we've had to be very careful about making it quite consistent. So we've put lots of lime wash and these bust plinths. And Sir Barry Jackson and Dawn Kemp, our Director of Museum, and a few other people have been taken a lot of time to work out which busts should be displayed on those plinths. But there will be a direct light coming down, as you can see. Next slide. So the other part of the stairs, we've got the main staircase through the middle. This staircase is going to be called the Hunter Stairs, and it's really roughly in place where the old staircase was. And it was really important to us and Westminster City Council to know where John Hunter's statue was going to be placed, and he will be at the base of these stairs, so hence the Hunter Stairs. And it was really important to come in through the retained entrance and have that processional journey to the library, and these stairs represent that. And we will have past presidents' portraits on the walls. We can have 2 rows actually now, and that balustrade is taken from a design of an old staircase. So it's all really, really carefully designed. That's one of my favourite bits of the college. Next slide. This is a CGI and how it's looking, so it will look really amazing. It's looking a bit sort of covered glass and things at the moment, but each floor has a walk around atrium gallery, and we will take every opportunity to show our treasures on those gallery showcase areas. Next slide, please. Again, the main stairs, quite distinctive. They won't look quite as dark and obvious, but with the atrium, I think it will be a nice contrast. The Lumley Library, on the left-hand side, we are taking that colouring and that furnishing back to how it used to be, back in the sort of 30s, 40s, rather than perhaps colours we remember. And on the right-hand side, like with any refurbishment project, we're working from the top down, so the ceiling is complete, and some of the mist protective detectors are in those roses that you won't be able to see. But we've been have to be very careful about not disturbing the fabric of the library. Next slide, please. This is how it's going to be, and I've showed this picture, but we're getting there. Next slide, please. So the first floor is the sort of professional surgical centre floor, where we have 32 examination rooms. And again, you can imagine they will be used quite well by people coming to the college to perhaps meet people on a one-to-one basis. But they will also be used for 2 circuits for examinations. And this is how it's looking at the moment, and that's at the rear of the building. The other part of the first floor is the library, of course, so it will be very examinations, academic sort of feel to that floor. Next slide, please. The office areas, we will have zones, but in the main, they will be open plan offices. And with the COVID working, we've been quite careful with the furniture we've bought, so we've been able to accommodate social distancing if we need to when we go back, but also give staff modern working environments. Next slide, please. Quite a nice picture. I'm sort of trying to find where I might sit on the first day, but overlooking Carey Street there, it seems a very nice view down to the Thames. Next slide. 4th floor is where all the specialist associations are going, and we've been working quite carefully with those 20 organisations that have booked leases and licenses on that floor, and the FSSA have been really helpful in looking at supporting us with some of the meeting room configuration. So all the specialist associations are currently looking at their legal documentation to come over to the new Barry building. Next slide, please. Important for staff and for all of you that will visit, we've got nice couple of tea points on each floor. And I think the next slide is as important. Yes, we've got the toilets installed. So I was quite pleased when I saw tiles and toilets in there. And each floor will have a specific colour. This is the President's meeting room. I promise it will look nicer. And some of the furniture from the current President's meeting room will be placed in this room. As you can imagine, that's on the 5th floor. Next slide, please. And along with the supporting office, there's the chief executives and the FDS deans, and a room for officers on that floor as well. Next slide, please. Just one of the other areas of the open working environment. So this is in the retained part, but again, modern working facilities. This is a nice feature on each of the floors. There's a showcase, so we have the opportunity to show some of our treasures at these showcases, and that will be quite a nice feature as you walk around the building. Next slide, please. Two main big function rooms at the top of the building, and you'll remember the 6th floor is our view, and we have two very flexible rooms. I think I took this picture. This will be where diplomats is held, and we can seat 300 people in that room, believe it or not. COVID means that they've brought a lot of the materials on site so that we've got that certainty for completion. So it looks a bit messy, but that is 2 rooms into one, and that will host Diplomats Day. And the next slide is at the front of the building, and again, a big conference suite there with 2 very nice conference committee rooms either side. And this is the place that some of the council wood paneling and some of the President's Lodge paneling is being moved to. So it's very much trying to, and a lot of the fireplaces as well is going into these areas. Next slide, I've nearly finished. Kitchen floor, so we've got kitchen equipment going in to support the conference areas. Next slide. And some of you will remember, probably not seen this close, but the bottles at the top of the building, and that's where we will all be toasting and meeting each other out on that balcony overlooking Lincoln's Inn Fields. Next slide. Right down to the basement now, we have the other side of the professional surgical centre, so where all the courses are going to be held. And we've got great big flexible IT future-proof rooms there where they will have immersive courses and all sorts of courses that will take place as they used to on the 4th floor of the old buildings. Next slide. And just finally, I just wanted to remind you, for those of you who supported the exams team, you might remember the old conservator stairs at the front of the building where you went from exams down to the basement, and we've refurbished these. That's where the conservation unit will be to support the Huntera Museum when it opens. But that's the old conservator stairs and the old exams office. So the final slide is just really, we've got the Huntera Museum to do, and that will start when the weights are out, and we have the landscaping at the front to do, which will be done before practical completion. So that's my hopefully you've enjoyed my little tour around your new building.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Jackie. That's certainly a comprehensive review, and you know, hopefully it will be handed over in good shape in March, as you say, and hopefully by November we'll be able to have our SFS meeting there. So it's now time for questions. Jane, who has just appeared on the screen, Jane Roberts, who's head of events at the college, is now going to amalgamate your questions and address them to both the President and Jackie. Jane, have we any questions yet come up on the screen?
We've had lots of questions.
Okay.
I am going to do my best to sort of keep them sort of merge them together as best we can. So we've had quite a few people asking about the role of the retired members and fellows and surgeons in a number of areas. So volunteering at the college as they used to, but also a few people asking about whether we think there's much of a role for retired fellows to do with online teaching and emotional support and mentoring of trainees. So that's sort of one for both of you a little bit. I don't know who wants to start.
I think it's Neil's.
You chip it.
Well, of course, the helpers in the Huntera Museum were always, a great part of, if you like, college life and the character of the college. And they often had stories to tell about surgery when they were practicing and so on. I think in terms of mentoring and online teaching and so on, there is a big discussion going on about the whole valuing of the late career surgeon or the early retired surgeon. It hasn't got very far yet, but I think many trusts are now coming around to the point of view that if we need workforce from somewhere, it has to be from those who would otherwise go at 55 or 60 or 65. We've got to make it attractive. We've got to make it flexible enough. There's got to be the solutions to the pensions problems, etc., etc. But there is a lot of, if you like, will to try and sort something out. On a slightly lighter note, I had a discussion this morning with the President of the Royal College of General Practitioners about retired surgeons helping with the vaccination program. For vaccinating the whole of the NHS, for example, there will need to be 60,000 vaccinators, and everybody's got to be vaccinated twice. And that's saying nothing about the vaccination program for the general population. So it may be that if you wanted to, you'd be able to volunteer for something like that. I know many were very disappointed during the height of the COVID that they volunteered, but their services weren't able to be used. And I don't know whether you think that's, if you like, being a bit patronizing, but the offer of maybe helping with the vaccination program, I think would be absolutely terrific.
I think it's true to say that people who had retired were regarded as high risk to be directly involved in patient care for obvious reasons. I think the other thing to mention regarding that, Neil, is that both the MDU are providing indemnity for individuals under those circumstances, and the GMC will put people back onto the specialist register.
Yeah.
Jane, any other amalgamated questions?
You're muted, Jane.
Jane, I think you're muted.
Sorry, you really would think by now that I would know how the platform works. My apologies to you all. So we've that's throwing me a little bit. We have had a few questions about the building. Couple of people asking regarding the provision of the previous provision of hotel. A very important question about will there be a bar? And in a slightly more sort of serious note from the bar question, although I do fully appreciate it, somebody was asking about whether the Force Majeure Act applies from any penalties on the Nuffield lease. I don't know if that's something you can answer succinctly.
I think perhaps Jackie to begin with, and then Neil to come back.
Yes, I'll try. So as far as the hotel is concerned, as we've discussed before, there is no bedroom accommodation in the new Barry building, and we would be using local hotel deals that we've starting to strike up with local hoteliers. There won't be a fixed bar in the new building, but there are lots of opportunities to have that service provided. So we will have, as we've always had, in-house caterers coming in that will provide a very good 5-star VIP dinner right through to the cafe. They'll be running the cafe. The facilities for serving alcohol will be throughout the building. and we can set up bars in either of those conference rooms. And you'll appreciate if we have 300 people in one of those rooms, we can't have a bar facility, but we can certainly turn that room around into a very nice evening facility for people to come in and enjoy the building and meet people and network. And as well as that, we can also provide bar facilities in some of the fellows and members' rooms, which I showed you one of them. The other one is more of a library research area on the first floor. The force majeure doesn't impact the Nuffield deal, unfortunately. It's not a construction date of contract. It's a very different sort of contract. It's only relevant to the construction contract that is a standard contract, but we did negotiate well with that. Hopefully those answers the 3 questions.
Neil, do you want to come back, or any comments, Neil? I think you're muted as well, Neil.
Maybe leave time for some other questions if you want.
Sure. Some more questions, Jane?
Yeah, of course. We've got a few questions regarding the sort of ongoing, how we're managing the ongoing COVID crisis. I feel like that's a bit of an understatement as a word. So has there been clear communications with primary care about limiting referrals? And on a sort of similar note, is there any scope for using the Nightingale hospitals to support surgical services?
Neil.
Okay, let's take Nightingales first. I don't mean to be political, but that is a bit of a problem. The Nightingales were, if you like, designed for a single purpose only, and that was for ventilated patients. In most of them, there are no progressive care facilities, and you certainly can't operate in them because the ventilation systems aren't right. I know that in Exeter, for example, they are repurposing the Nightingale Hospital as a kind of diagnostic hub, because there's a big backlog of endoscopy and CT scans and so on as well. So that's the way they're being used. So it was a bit of a problem to have a single purpose for them. And indeed, you'll have seen some of the reports in the papers over the weekend about how little they've been used and how much they've cost. In terms of the whole business about referring patients and general practice and so on, this has been a bit of a problem. So when NHS England, first of all, put out their message about staying at home, nobody went to their general practitioner either. And so there has been quite a lot of evidence now of delayed diagnosis and delayed investigation, etc., etc. And that is gradually, if you like, getting back to normal. Of course, whether or not you see your general practitioner won't make any difference over the size of the backlog. There is a little committee that's looking at some procedures and whether they should still be offered by the health service. They're very, very tiny numbers of procedures, and the total numbers of patients, if you included them, would have a 0.5% impact on the overall wait list. So that's not going to have much effect either.
Jane.
Thank you. So we've got a couple more, I think, and then I think we are running a little bit over already. So I think that might be all we've got time for. So a nice place to sort of end would be that it starts with a comment. So I'm pleased to see that the college is so active in the political and NHS aspects of the provision of surgical services. Will this continue? Because the traditional college responsibilities of training and research do totally depend on these issues.
Neil,
so shall I answer that? I mean, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, at the moment we have weekly meetings with the medical director of the NHS. We have alternate weekly meetings with Chris Whitty. We have alternate weekly meetings with Matt Hancock. And we are also feeding into the House of Commons committees of one kind or another, and we are going to bang the drum like crazy on behalf of the restoration of planned surgery and provision for our trainees, I can assure you.
Could I just follow that one up, Neil, if I may, just with a quick point? It's just going back to the whole question of training. You explained very clearly the problems, and I'm sure we all appreciate the problems, but at the end of the day, there needs to be some sort of quality control of trainees during these very difficult times to ensure that, in fact, the quality of training, the limited, even though it may be limited, that the individuals are becoming or developing the appropriate competencies to move on. And this may not be always possible through exams, but I know it's an impossibly difficult issue, and I'm sure the college is considering this, but do you have any overall feeling for the future, and if this should continue for a full year, in which a year of training will have been disturbed as far as individuals are concerned? Do you have any feel for this?
I think the point we're getting to is that we are going to recognise a COVID, if you like, generation of surgical trainees. They will probably be called the COVID generation. They will be recognised both for the difficulties they personally had and the difficulties the systems had in providing them with the right training. So at the moment, if you like, the discussion is over. Do you prolong training for another year or two until competency is achieved? That's Health Education England's budget, and they've only got so much, and the Treasury are pretty tough. And if you don't let people off one end, you can't let people in at the other end. Or do you have some kind of, if you like, allowance for this special generation of surgeons and make very good arrangements for them in their first placements as consultants? Let it be seen that, you know, there needs to be a really good mentoring system.
Yeah.
And that mentoring can transition from one-to-one to something remote. Again, it's all in discussion. It's being recognized as a huge problem. No perfect solutions yet.
Well, thank you very much. Are there any other questions, urgent questions, Jane, that you would like to?
We've got a couple that I'm just going to follow up with directly, because they're about very specific aspects of the new building. And we have had one query regarding the new CSAS process, which again I'm going to forward on to our Director of Membership. But I did wonder if Neil perhaps wanted to say a quick word about the CSAS and sort of the fact that we have revamped it a little bit. So CSAS is the confidential support and advice service that the college has been providing, and it's been playing quite a sort of key role. So
yeah, shall I just say then, Irvin? Yeah. I recognise that one of the problems was that we did have surgeons saying, I was in trouble, I rang the college and I couldn't get through. And I thought that was clearly a weakness, and that something should be done about it. And we now have a much revamped service, which is very responsive, which has both a kind of well-being element as you get through the front door of it, obviously on the phone or whatever. And then once the appropriate questions have been discussed, if there are professional issues, you would then be put in touch with a senior expert in your specialty subject. And we hope that's going to help with the whole sort of hotline issue and making it much more responsive and much more sensitive to our members' needs.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, Jane.
I think that's done.
We're done. Well, look, leaves me to really thank Neil for taking the time to provide such a wonderful overview of the hugely difficult problems which you are facing as surgeons throughout the country are facing. And I know we're all extremely grateful to the whole of the NHS for the tremendous service they provided over this difficult period, despite all the criticism which seems to be flying around. But the college seems to be carrying out their duties in a very responsible way, and we're very grateful to you, Neil, and to your colleagues. And thank you to Jackie, and thanks very much for showing us how the transformation of the college is going on, and we're most grateful to you both, and we're very grateful for you taking the time to speak to us. The final thing I actually have to do is to ask people who are still online if they would mind contributing to a ballot. What the SFS committee would like to know is whether or not you feel that having monthly webinars of this type, in which we get distinguished individuals to come and discuss a whole variety of topics, not necessarily all related to COVID, obviously, but a whole variety of topics, surgical and non-surgical, for an hourly webinar at monthly intervals. And so we've got this little ballot, which I think Jane has kindly put together, and perhaps you could just put it on the screen, Jane.
Ed's about to run it, so it should pop up.
Okay, so basically we want to know whether you would be supportive of monthly webinars given by distinguished experts on the diverse subject. It's the three things are yes, and 5 p.m. is a convenient time. Yes, but prefer 8 p.m. And no. It'd be most useful to the committee if we felt there would be support for this. We could certainly organise it, and the college can put on the webinar. So perhaps you could vote now. How do they vote, Jane?
So you just need to, it should be on your screen now. It's a slightly different view for us, Irvin.
Oh, yes, you
just need to select,
so,
click the option that you're selecting, and we're going to keep it open for about a minute or so.
So please just click on one of those three options. We'd be most grateful for your views. We'll just leave it on the screen, as Jane says, for a minute or so.
Yeah, we'll just give you a minute. So it does look like everybody has voted who's going to. So we will.
Has everybody voted?
Close that now. Yep.
Do we have
the results?
Results?
There is interest, and the agreement seems to be that the 5 p.m. slot is one that works. So we will look.
What sort of agreement? Do we have a percentage?
Sorry. So yeah. So it's at 79% of the 90% of delegates that have voted. And somebody else can do that maths.
One for a 5 p.m. Okay, fine. Thank you very much, Jane. That's great. So
we'll close that.
We can just close that down now. So finally, if there seems to be an overwhelming view that this webinar, a monthly webinar, would be a popular option at 5 o'clock, so we will meet as the SFS committee will meet online in the next week or so to decide on a programme and get back to you as soon as we've got it organised. So thank you all for joining in. Hope you found it interesting. I certainly have, and certainly very informative. And once again, many thanks, not only to Neil and to Jackie for speaking, but also to Jane for organising it, and Eduardo and Judith Mitchell and Jane behind the scenes for making sure it runs so smoothly. Thank you all very much. Keep well, keep safe, and hopefully we'll meet online, and hopefully, as I say, in Bristol in June. That's what we're hoping for. And good evening.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.